All right. Now it is time for the What Are You Into Lately segment. I'm super excited to chat with one of the most talented people I know, my friend, my dear friend of 10 years, maybe plus, maybe minus. I doubt it's minus, Kaylee. Kaylee is a graphic designer, photographer, woodworker, project manager, business owner, illustrator, curator, but first and foremost, you guys couldn't see she was dancing. First and foremost, she is human. So, Kaylee, welcome all the way from Michigan via Zoom. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super fun to chat. I'm the last of the best friend group, so honored.
Specifically, the college best friend
The
group is
college best
what Kaylee is referring to. I mentioned a handful of times, like my college housemate. So yeah, she's another one of those folks joining us today. So no, I'm so happy you were able to join. I'm super excited for this very light conversation. Kaylee and I, we went back and forth for a while on what we were gonna chat about today. Initially, I was like, okay, Kaylee, we're focusing on pop culture. What topics land with you? Is it The Bachelorette, Love Island? We were, questing on a reality TV situation, but I kept being like, I don't know which one of those to focus on. And so I was like, God, well, what would I like to chat with Kaylee most about? And then I was like, oh, duh. Discussions about like the inner self and personality frameworks and who are we? That is what I want to chat with Kaylee about. For those of you who are like, what? Hold on. You took a pivot from pop culture to like the inner self. Yes, we did. And I don't care that that sounds intense. I agree that it is, but Kaylee and I are intense people. So that's just where we've landed today. Anyway, Kaylee, anything else you want to add actually before I kind of get into the inner self speak? Anything else you want the fans to know about you?
Yeah, I love pop culture and some of those things you talked about, but I think it just makes the most sense for us in the things that we kind of normally talk about and the things that I love to talk about yeah, finding yourself and inner self and things like that. I think you asking me to talk about that just feels like you saying, will you talk about yourself? Because it feels so interconnected into like how I live my life and the things that I think about like on the regular. Yeah, a little bit almost hard to pull out that from who I am to like talk specifically about this one aspect, but I'm excited to try to break it apart. So
Me too. And I know I gave you a bit of an intro, but I would love for you, especially as we have an episode about, the endless pursuit of finding yourself. I would love you to take a moment to speak to how you would describe yourself and let, listeners understand who you really are. Help the listeners understand a little bit about how normal thinking deeply is to you. Tell us a little bit about your response when I pitched this topic to you.
yeah, so when we talked about doing this as a topic, I was like, I think I said something like, oh, how I think every day, every moment, or something like that. It's so kind of integrated into my life and the way that I think. Yeah. Asking questions to myself about myself, trying to find out those things is pretty pivotal. Well, pivotal to like, yeah, my thought process. So,
So yeah, I mean, I knew that it's just a part of who you are and that you love this stuff naturally. So with that, would love for you to reintroduce yourself in a way you think listeners will understand you best. I know I did, but obviously as this episode is about you and who you are, feel free to add to that as much as you feel comfortable.
yeah. So you talked about me being a designer illustrator. I think that those are helpful labels that I say about myself. And I say like I am those things instead of I work in that field because that's like pretty uh I think tied to my identity and I like love that. Um, I would say I'm just a generally curious person, which I think led me into um like the art world. I would say I'm pretty curious about most things and art is the avenue that it's just presented itself. So that feels like a big part of just who I am. Um
Nice. Love that. The art. Do you refer to yourself as an artist ever?
It's really interesting because I feel like I've started to say more that I'm an artist because when you say you're a graphic designer, no one actually knows what that. So I think if I say artist and then depending on who it is, if you know, they're receptive to having a deeper conversation about it, you can elaborate. But
So as you kind of describe yourself, I think initially it was like, oh, she's going to go into so much depth about how she sees the world and how she feels, and which you didn't really do. It actually kind of surprises me. So maybe I'd love if you could give us some descriptors that are less tangible and maybe more intrinsic descriptors about who you are.
yeah, well, I don't want to get, I guess, too ahead of myself, but I feel like first for maybe where our conversation might go, but I really feel like curious has been the past couple years the word that I would use to like I guess describe like why I do a lot of stuff I do or why I am the way I am. I think I've been like a wanderer. I say I bop around. Right now I'm living in Michigan and it's the longest place I've lived as an adult, which is interesting. I think some of that like wandering is definitely tied to finding who you are and being curious about that.
How would you say the way you describe yourself has changed over time or in different stages of life?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think as someone that continually is like on the search to find out who I am, I think I wouldn't say I like latch on to, well maybe I would latch on to different like identifiers that feel right for the moment. So I think as I'm getting older and more, I guess, adult, I'd almost say like I'm describing myself almost more child-like. I think as I get older, I think the seriousness of which with which you take yourself when you're younger, I think just really I have found, I know, I guess not everybody, but I have found that that has been less as I've gotten older. So I think my perception of just like who I am and the way that I would describe myself has become looser and maybe almost less important for it to be specific and defined and like have strong edges. I think all the edges of the descriptors have probably gotten softer. And I think it matters differently at different points in your life. Like when I was younger, I'm like, OMG, who am I? And I think I still feel that way, but it's less, I think as an adult, it feels less like it's not career focused because I already have a career and I'm in a career that I'm happy with. I think when you're younger, there's what's the road, what's the years ahead, and I think it feels more pressure to be like, who am I? That's maybe really circling around, but yeah.
What do you feel like has helped you understand that shift? Like you were speaking to, well, when I was younger, I feel like it was a little bit more rigid. Now it feels a little bit more loose. How are you learning that sort of stuff about yourself? Are you, like journaling or tracking certain things? I know historically we've both been really into personality frameworks that help us dig a little bit deeper to identify that stuff. So speak a little bit more to maybe some frameworks you've used to help you get to those points.
Yeah, I do journal. I don't journal nearly as much as I used to. I actually just found uh, a bunch of my old journals and just flipping through them, it is really interesting to see like through lines of the way that I was trying to figure out myself. And it's like something from 2018 is like very similar to like something I just wrote last week. But it all falls under this like pursuit of me continually trying to figure out who I am. Like maybe the language was different or the like question that I was asking was different, but it's still the same. So I do love journaling and I think it's nice to be able to like look back on a different version of yourself and like understand that it's all still a part of the same you. But probably the biggest thing for me is the Enneagram. I feel like I can't really talk about this topic without talking about the Enneagram. That's probably been the most helpful framework for me.
Is the Enneagram. Give us a
I
little
was about to say, for anybody that doesn't know, the Enneagram is like a pretty ancient typing system, which I don't even know if typing system is like the correct way to describe it, but it's like a 9-point modality kind of personality framework. But the Enneagram is really helpful because it's not about like why you're doing or what you're doing. It's about like why, whereas opposed to like Myers-Briggs, it's like, well, I'm an introvert, but now I'm more extroverted. The Enneagram is about who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. So diving into that has really helped me understand some of the motivations of my life and why I'm doing things and why I like crave certain things or am drawn to certain uh people or connections and stuff like that. And it's been would recommend.
Give us a little more insight on that. So, I mean, be a little more specific as to what has it taught about, like maybe speak to how you've used it and what's really come about from it.
I feel like I could do a whole podcast episode on Enneagram.
You
I
could, you really could.
I have probably studied it more than the average person. I still think maybe at some point in my life I can see myself teaching it. I think maybe when I'm older. But I'm an Enneagram 4, which unironically or maybe ironically is the individualist, romantic, or sometimes called the artist. And their whole like deepest desire is to be authentic and to like know their identity and who they are. That definitely aids itself to this pursuit of finding myself. But I think within the Enneagram, probably a lesser known thing that has been maybe the most helpful in pursuit of finding myself is learning about subtypes. There's 3 different subtypes in every number. I say it's like the flavor of your number: self-preservation, social, or sexual. And I am a self-preservation person, which the way that I describe it in like caveman terms, I'm doing air quotes, I know you guys can't see, but um if like you're a self-preservation person, you're going to think about your own needs first and thinking about how they're met primarily. And then if you're a social person, you're like thinking about the group and the crowd first. And then if you're a one-on-one person, you're thinking about more intimate relationships first. So being self-preservation and understanding that about myself, it's really helped me under my thought process on stuff. And like it's very natural for me if I'm like going out with friends to be like, who's driving? What time am I getting home? Am I gonna get food? Like as a self-preservation person, it's not about being selfish and only thinking about myself in any way, but I think I'm such an internally focused person. Having identifying that self-pres just really helped me uncover a layer of understanding myself. Um, and recognizing like my needs, which is all a part of, learning who you are. So that's a little snippet of the Enneagram and how it's helped me. But um, yeah.
It's really helpful to think about those three subtypes again: sexual, social, and self-preservation. I have been experienced with the Enneagram as well, not nearly as in depth as Kaylee, but I initially remember reading about the types. So for those of you who have never even heard of it, just type in Enneagram. It'll show you the numbers. There are these like offshoot tests you can take to see what number you'd identify with. They're not recommended by people who know the framework really intensely, but I don't think there's any harm in checking it out if that's your, very foundational level knowledge. All that to say, when I took one of those tests early on to see, ooh, okay, what does this have to do with who I am and blah, 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 I was typed as the extremely like social, extroverted, lights up a room, loves attention, energy seeking number. And I remember that really identifying with me then. But over time, I was like, I really do not know how. That is what I tested as because all the people around me who are also that number seem to exhibit it so differently than me. And I think those three subtypes Kaylee referenced helped me understand that I was a more self-preserved version of that number. So exactly what Kaylee said, like in any scenario, I'm thinking about myself. I mean, for lack of a better word, like I'm thinking of exactly what Kaylee said. Like, when does this start? Am I comfortable? Am I happy? Am I hungry? Am I interested? Am I like that is just the framework of how I'm thinking about any scenario I'm in. And just like Kaylee said, it doesn't mean I'm not paying attention to anyone else or not caring. But at the end of the day, those thoughts will always be at the forefront of my mind. And I would say it's better that they are for the group, because when I do know those things about myself, I'm able to take care of them so I can be more focused on the other people around me. So, just an interesting way to kind of think about how those subtypes work in practice and what it really looks like to be aware of that sort of thing. And one aspect of that is that it's really helpful. The other side of that coin is that it is exhausting because you're constantly like, okay, does the Enneagram help me understand myself? Or like the journaling, is that helping me understand myself? Like, what other aspects can I be diving into to really help me know about myself? I've experienced some dissonance with that. And Kaylee, I'm just kind of curious, like, what it's been like for you to know that you want to keep learning more about yourself and diving into that. But on the other hand, sometimes you just want to be and exist.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is easy if you're someone that's like us into like really diving into figuring out who you are and using frameworks like this that you can get caught up in almost it becoming who you are by choice kind of thing. Like you're like, oh yeah, this is me. This is how I'm gonna be now. And I think it can, yeah, I think that's like a possible trap. But I think what you're just saying about like being exhausted, I think right now I would say I'm in a phase of my life where I've done so much of this like endless, literally feels like an endless pursuit of knowing yourself for a couple years. And I think I'm in a place now where I am just more so letting myself exist. And not to say there's no questions or pursuit of knowing myself, but it's like I'm just holding it a little bit looser and letting myself exist and like what I like and whatever, because it is exhausting. I think it's a lot of mental energy sometimes. I I say it's exhausting, but also at the same time I wouldn't have it any other way. Like I wouldn't not want to be doing it, I think, but I think it goes through seasons of like allowing yourself to exist. For me, I'm always curious, so it kind of just maybe shifts where it's like I'm allowing myself to exist and maybe I'm just asking lighter questions instead of it being like
Mm.
a in-depth pursuit continuously.
Mm.
Uh, but definitely exhausting at times for sure.
And I know, kind of just getting back to why this is the way we even think in the first place. I know we had a discussion via voice memos on our phones the other day about potentially how our upbringings have impacted this desire to know more about ourselves and to kind of help explain why we're both so interested in self-discovery. And I know for me, growing up, my family, very traditional Christian, evangelical, non-denominational, church 2 to 3 times a week, family of six, so somewhat big, but not huge. And I was the second oldest of four. So my family, like super, fairly structured. I was very active. My family was very engaged. But looking back, I didn't have, in my opinion, if my parents are listening, I didn't have as much autonomy as I knew I needed and desired. My parents, great people. I always tell them, you guys had me on a leash forever. And they just like roll their eyes and tell me, you had a good childhood, which I did. But those could be, one and the same, having great experiences of being great, very grateful, but also wishing I did have more autonomy. I was so independent. I was so bold and confident. And sometimes I feel like those aspects of my personality were a bit stifled in childhood. So I think as I've gotten older and just seen more about the world, I had a natural desire to seek out resources and frameworks that I felt would help me get to know myself better because I felt so stifled for a lot of the time. And so that is a huge piece of why anytime there's any new, like astrology, Myers-Briggs, whatever it is, I'm always like, oh, cool, let's check it out. Like, let's dig into it. Why not? Like my thought is always, why not? Let's go versus no, 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 no. And so I know for you, your childhood circumstances were a bit different. You were more of a latchkey kid, which you can kind of go into. But so give us a bit of an idea of how you grew up and how that could impact this pursuit for you.
Randomly, this is the second time this week someone said latchkey kid, and I like love that phrase. Um, which I definitely am. I think, yeah, when Jadonna and I were going back and forth, I think it just felt like we couldn't talk about this pursuit of finding out who you are without talking about family because I think there's so much on the nature versus nurture conversation about just like how much your family, and I guess I would say in my experience, a lack of family like influences both who you become and I think curating the nature of who you are. I think my family was just pretty uninvolved in my life. Like my parents, I would just say, like, my parents didn't know how to be parents. So, like, my search of self just started really young because I was like, I have an older brother, which a lot of people think I'm an only child, which is kind of funny. Um, but just like how I act and maybe hold myself. I'm gonna send this to my brother, so shout out to him if he's listening. But it's been interesting talking about how different of people that we've become. Like my brother and I have had conversations as an adult with our parents being the way they are and just our family structure being what it was and how much that shapes like who you become, like how you intake that and what it does internally to you or like how it shapes the path that you end up going and the questions you end up asking in your life. Um I did grow up also like very involved in church and but I think for me I loved church and I loved school because there were like parental people involved that I could like connect with in a way that like I wasn't doing with my parents. So like I loved school and I was a teacher's pet, not because of like grades or I was like even cared about them liking me. I just wanted them to be in my life. So yeah, I think it's my pursuit of that just happened so young to start to like really live into my independence and like mentally ask who I wanted to be and who I was and not a lot of that was influenced by my parents and still isn't like my parents are not a source of any like backboard talking through things in my life or asking questions or kind of thing. So my friends have really become that for me, but it is hard in that there's no foundation of like who you are. Your family is really set up that's like, these are the things we believe in. This is like who we are as a family and it really creates this unit and that's something that I've never really had and have always struggled with about like who am I? And I think yeah, has just pushed that mentally a mental conversation for me like way younger maybe than most people but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and what you were saying about your brother kind of going two steps back on that, I remember seeing this TikTok psychologist, don't judge me, and I don't remember their name, so get over it. But they were like, so many people talk about their experience in their household as being different than their sibling, and they kind of critique that, like, how did they end up like this and I ended up like this, or how did I end up like this and they ended up like that? And the person was just like, what you bring to this world that is so uniquely you, your feelings, your emotions, your thought, your ideas, how those intersect with who your parents are can like ricochet and turn into something so completely different than what your sibling will maybe produce just because maybe you're more sensitive or you're less aware or you're inclined to be more gentle or you're more fearful and how those things that are just the essence of you end up look just completely differing in how you become and how your sibling becomes with the exact same background. So I remember hearing that and being like, that's so interesting because some siblings end up being so similar. I feel like my siblings, like, we're fairly different in some things, but we're still so similar, I would say, all in all. And there are four of us, and we're all so different. But, you look at other families and you're like, whoa, the siblings turned out so completely different. How is that even possible? And that's just interesting. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, well, speaking of TikTok wisdom, I saw this TikTok once that I just thought was like, I'm not a parent now, but I think just really thinking about it for the future, and I just thought that this was really meaningful. I heard someone say like, it's not a kid's job to tell their parent who they are; it's the parent's job to figure out who the kid is. I was like, damn, I wish that was my experience. Like, yeah, I think that I can't really imagine like if my family would have been more involved in ways of like them also trying to be curious and interested in who I was, how that would have affected my own experience of who I was. Like
Mm.
it's yeah, I mean that's obviously something I'll never it's like, oh, I'm just so curious about that, but yeah, I think it's just all crazy like how different decisions like affect your life and the past in that way.
And I know you've been in therapy for a lot of years. So I'm just curious.
Called out.
I'm curious. You came on a podcast talking about yourself. You better
I
talk about yourself. I'm curious how that has helped this pursuit of knowledge. Like, to me, that's just another one of those frameworks
yeah.
that's, just like more intense, more intentional, holding you accountable a little bit more. So I don't know. How has that intersected this pursuit for you?
Yeah. No, that's like so huge. I think the two immediate things that come to mind that have helped me so much in the pursuit of knowing myself is kind of more early on when I was in started doing therapy. Like I had a therapist ask me like because I think there's two sides to this for me about like finding out who I am as a person and then finding out who I am as an artist. And I think those are both really, really important things to me, but they do feel separate a lot of the times and then they oversect sometimes. And I think I had a therapist at the beginning and I think this really helped me who was like, could you essentially intersect them more? Like, could the art that you make be a little bit of trying to express the way your family was, like aid in this search for who you are? And I really feel like that changed a lot of what I make art about. And I think it continually is evolving, but that really helped me. And then this is a very specific story, but like when I was little, I used to go through my parents' stuff, like in their room. Specifically, my mom had like nail polish and all this stuff like under her sink in her bathroom, and my dad had this like wardrobe that he had all these little like knickknacks. And I remember vividly as a kid continually going through their stuff and just seeing like what was there. I always put it back. It cleaned up. Um, I had a therapist recently talk about, or like kind of talked me through and helped me realize that I was doing that because I wanted to know them and they weren't giving me any of that. And it's just like such an insight into the way that I connect or like the intimacy that I like desire with people. And my parents weren't giving that to me. And as a kid, I didn't obviously know like how to ask for that. And just being able to see that these actions that I was doing, like ultimately, what is that telling me about myself? Well, it's telling me that like I really value intimacy and quality time and connection and all of those things. So I think it's yeah, another framework, another tool um, to aid in the pursuit. So
Yeah.
I don't think the pursuit of knowing myself in any way causes me anxiety, but I think it's almost the pursuit sometimes is from anxiety, if that makes sense. And like this is so specific, probably just to my experience. I mean, I hope that somebody else feels this way, but I feel like a lot of my childhood experiences, though, like if there's no one there to hear it and a tree falls in the forest, like or whatever the phrase is, like that's a lot of my experience. Like if there's no one there to tell me that I exist, do I exist? Which is maybe very deeply existential, but like I think a lot of my pursuit of knowing myself is definitely based in anxiety. I think it eases for me when I'm feeling like I have more grounding on who I am. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I've also wondered if my intense pursuit of knowing myself ends up being the exact opposite of what I intend, ending up keeping me in a box, ironically, because I know in middle and high school and college I was super social and I wanted to be liked and I was doing as much as possible. And then when I moved away from all of that, I'm like, okay, I'm actually an introvert. I'm drained by social interaction. I'm not energized. I love my own thoughts and my inner peace and keeping things simple. And so part of me just felt betrayed by my past self. Like, I'm like, who was I always like this? Or did I feel like because that's who I thought I was, that's how I acted? But then the other part, it's like, okay, Jadonna, well, you can be social and you could also go home and want to be introverted. Like maybe you just changed over time. So I don't know. I guess What are your thoughts on that? Like, does thinking about yourself kind of keep you into a box? Kind of what you said about the Enneagram, where the number could turn into this is how I identify, so this is how I'm gonna act. Yeah.
Yeah. Something that I continually think about, probably at least once a week, is I actually think Bailey, who was on the podcast a couple episodes ago, but
That's
I
all
think
like what next episode.
yeah, I don't remember if she's the one that shared this quote with me or I heard it online, but it's yeah, this phrase it's who you are is not separate from who you will become. And I think about that so often, and I think even in what you were just saying of like maybe you were a certain way when you were younger and like was I betraying myself by not being like true to who I was because that doesn't feel like me anymore. One, I think it's definitely natural for you to like evolve over time and change, you know, how you do things or think about things. But I also think it's like all a part of who you are. Like it doesn't need to be
Mm.
a separate experience. And even if you were, I feel like as a lot of junior high or high school kids would do, like pretend to be this certain person because like that's what other people are doing. I think it's still giving you information in some way. You're like, okay, well, that wasn't me. So now I know that that's me being inauthentic. Like, even if it was a pretend time in your life or not, like, I think it's still giving you information about who you are. Um, it's still like all a part of, you know, your discovery of yourself.
That's a good point. And maybe that has to do with how I see getting to know myself. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's something to conquer, which is my issue in life. It's like it's something to be, it's something to get ahead of, it's something to
Yeah.
like win. Like, oh, I know myself, therefore I know what I do in this scenario. I know. And I like how you're thinking about it because you're like your current self isn't any better than your past self, even if you were maybe doing things that you wouldn't have done if you were more aware. It's a part of the process. And I think that's another reason why you're a great person to be on here and talk about this with me because of your propensity toward curiosity and how that's been such a huge proponent of in my opinion and what I've seen of you, how you get to know yourself and trying to do that without judgment. And that can be a hard part of it too, the judgmental aspect.
I think it's partly like maybe being an artist has helped me in that because I would say I'm a it's part of the process person. Like I'm almost never thinking about a destination. I think just in contrast to maybe how you're thinking about it. Like I think yeah, so me saying like who you are is not separate from who you will become, like it's the whole thing is a process until you don't exist anymore. I like I think is how I continually think about it. So there could be some like concrete steps along the way, or maybe you're like continually going up and down and you're building this like foundation of who you are. So it doesn't mean that there's no like you're not gathering anything or nothing's like concrete and it's always just like in flow. But I think there's never like a destination of it in my mind. So
Which is so freeing. And kind of with that, how have you felt like you are truly connected to your inner self? Like how do you know you're not just playing a character or you're not just doing what's popular and attractive? I know you try to not see that in a judgmental way, but how are you kind of like quantifying? You're likely not quantifying it at all. But if you know what I'm getting at, how do you know you're being genuine?
I think it takes time to know that you're being genuine. I think another thing, maybe like a branch of this conversation is about like learning how things feel in your body. That might be like veering into a different conversation, but I think for me, I can tell when I'm being genuine or not, like by the way that it feels, which maybe is ambiguous and a vague thing to say, but like in my body, it I can tell when something feels authentic or not, and I think that feels like anxiety or like pressure in your chest or different things, and I'm like, I'm being so not myself, or I'm definitely pretending, but I think it's that is definitely a skill, I think, to learn, or I'll say something and immediately after be like, that's not what I meant to say. That was the most disgenuine thing I've ever said. Like, I can tell, but I think it's been a continual practice of like being introspective and like really investigating how things feel when I'm either doing them or saying them. And so I think that's a process. I think that can be hard sometimes to know when you're being authentic. But I think also another Enneagram pitch, but as an Enneagram 4, like one of my biggest desires is to be authentic. So I think me specifically, I maybe have a different relationship with that than some people. So that's like one of my biggest desires is to be authentic. So
And I think we're aligned in that. I one of the things I was thinking about preparing for this part of the episode was I tend to know I'm being inauthentic when I am being really liked and when no one is having an issue with what I'm saying. Because not that I'm not liked at all. That's not. I more so mean when I'm not ruffling any feathers. That's kind of like my sign that I'm not really being genuine. Because whenever I am, even if I say what I feel like is delicate, I've always told people if there's one thing I can work out in life, it's being, more delicate with my words. But that is how, even when I was reflecting on the past, I was like, oh yeah, I feel like I was really liked growing up and in college and stuff. And that's just been another reminder, oh yeah, because I wasn't saying what I really meant and thought because I was very conscious of how that could be perceived. So I also think that's helpful too. If you happen like if you spend enough time with yourself to know how you truly are, and at least for me, I would do a lot of journaling. I was really open and like honest as a person with my family. And I would get in issues a lot with like saying things I maybe shouldn't have said or being too direct or whatever. And then in different contexts, they're like, oh, weird, those same things aren't coming up. How am I presenting myself differently in that scenario? And how is it maybe contrasting with what I would normally do? And why am I changing? Even at work. Again, I realized growing up, a lot of the amazing opportunities I had I kind of squashed because I was trying to be a more likable version of myself. When I do my best work, when I'm like a little bossy, kind of like when I can kind of say, no, I have to be organized. I have to do this. This has like, I have to do, you know, I have to do things in a very specific way is when I do my best work. Then historically, a handful of those jobs, I was trying to be more accepted socially than put out the best product I could. And now I'm over that. So I don't know. That just came up for me. That's a way I have been able to think and ask myself those questions. And yeah, I don't know if that brings up anything for you.
well, I mean, I would say me reflecting on your life for like the past years, I feel like 10 plus years, I don't know. Like I feel like I've seen that play out. Like I feel like I've seen you transition from maybe being less authentic to being more authentic. Like, and I think I've even seen the like probably me at some point and friends of ours looking at you being like, did Jadonna change? She like, who is she now? Or just like, I feel like I've seen that process like play out. And I think it's just cool to hear you say it's you becoming more authentic because that's what I would want for you always in like in life. So yeah, it's just interesting. It's like I think really knowing yourself or being in tune with yourself does come with a level of confidence that I think does threaten other people sometimes in
All the
poss
time.
yeah, in possibly different ways. And I think for me, that's both a positive and negative thing about it. I think this is such a specific anecdote also, but like I've had that maybe to my joy, but to their dismay in dating. Been like, I just have a very strong what I like, what I'm okay with, what I'm not, like all these different things. And I think a lot of the times in when you're like going on dates or there's like this level of like especially with men, that like a woman will just be like cute and go along with things, and I just don't really usually do that. And I think it confuses a lot of men that I've been on dates with. Like I've seen it on their face, which is yeah, fun for me, but confusing for them. So uh that's a very specific thing. But yeah, it comes with this confidence that's sometimes hard for other people to take.
I could literally give you 50 stories about how even when I wasn't operating out of like I feel the most confident I've ever felt in my life, and I also take the less shit I've ever taken because I know what I want, I know who I am. Ironically, I don't feel like I know where I'm going. I feel like that was something I used to have such an eye on. And now that part of it is kind of missing. I used to have a trajectory and could have told you whatever, and now I have no idea. But all the other kind of pieces that are the parts of me, I don't. So I love that about you because I also feel like the people I'm keeping around me are also people who have very strong sense of self. And I do want to have a dating episode a little bit later. I've talked to a couple of people about what that would be like. So we are going to kind of get into that. But I would say, how how do you end up interacting with people who are on various parts of that self-reflection journey? You mentioned dating and how that can be tense. I would say more often than not, most people are not aware of like the intricacies of their personalities and really tracking their thoughts and feelings and ideals and how they adjust over time. So does that make engaging with people like that difficult or almost inexistent for you? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think a love language for me, both receiving and like giving, is asking questions. And so I think when I'm either interacting with people, either like good friends or like new acquaintance people, I think it really just changes like the depth of the questions that I do ask. Sometimes I've asked a really intense question in like a group, and you can tell like who it's off-putting to or not immediately, like 100% say that like this person isn't in tune with themselves. But like the response to some of the questions that I feel like I ask in groups or one-on-one really gives me a sense, at least like just a glimpse, I guess, maybe not a full sense, but where this person is with their relationship with themselves. And like sometimes it's been hard for me, I think, just because this is so much of my life, to comprehend that it's not part of other people's lives. Like, so I felt some tension with people that it doesn't, because I'm like, I just feel like we're on a different like wave of existence sometimes. But I think it's like, again, being curious about like, how can I still connect with this person? And maybe I'm just asking them like a slightly less intense question. Or like,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still like they're still human. There's still like so much intricacies about them that like I can still connect with and learn. But I think it's come with age to be like, I don't have to be this intense. I can just ask them a lighter question. Um,
And we talked about the role ego has in a lot of different things, but particularly knowing more about yourself is supposed to squash ego, not embellish it, if that even makes sense. So I feel like if, as we are leading in deeper and trying to know more about ourselves, hopefully, even though it's hard in practice, that would give us more grace for folks who maybe don't do that. I say that calling myself out because this is a source of tension between my husband and I a lot, where I'm like, what are you thinking? No, but like, what does that mean? Yeah, but why did you do that? And what does that mean? And do you know where that's coming from? And he's like, would you just, he's literally said, sometimes I feel like you don't let me exist. Like, you just don't let me live as however I feel at any given point, and it not have to mean like a paragraph or an essay. And I'm like, dang, that's real though. And I think it's important to see where that works for me in this stage of life and with where I am. Meeting people where they're at should be intertwined with this pursuit for us. I feel personally that that's kind of hard and it's easy to judge and be like, oh my God, that person's like, whatever. But I feel like the more time I spend thinking about this, it's helped me give people more grace because I'm like, oh yeah, we're not all the same. And if I'm more aware,
yeah.
I can adjust.
I feel like meeting people where they're at is a very profound phrase, and very like a way to love the people in your life. Like, but I almost feel like knowing yourself is what helps you do that. Like
Hmm.
being able to, okay, I'm gonna put this really like deep part that I would like to pursue aside to meet this person where they're at, and I can let go of that because it doesn't affect meet like just knowing different layers of yourself, I think really helps you meet different people at different spots.
And kind of with that, do you have any recommended practices to maybe help folks get to know themselves better? I know lots of people are at different places on this spectrum, but maybe for those who could be more intimidated, who are like, I feel uncomfortable, or for those who do this all the time and just need some new ideas.
Yeah, I think maybe people that are like new to the pursuit of knowing themselves, I think in my mind it's like could be two camps of people that just generally maybe it just doesn't cross their mind as much. And I think to those people, I would say, like, just start maybe asking yourself questions about why you like the things you like, and just start to be curious about the things that you're doing and the things that you like. I think, especially if like you've never really stopped to take the time to think about that stuff, I think it just can give you really good insight about, who you are. I think the other camp of people could be people that haven't really explored it because there's a fear with that or scared like kind of scared to do that, and I think I would say it is scary. I think like the internal world is very full and potentially could give some fear, but I think it's like there's this whole beautiful existence within it. So I would just encourage, I think if anyone is in that camp, to just like dive in again with curiosity and know that it's okay if it's scary, but there's like a lot to find in there. um And then I think people who have maybe been on this pursuit, like I have for a long time, I think it's sometimes you can get in you're doing the same type of kind of frameworks or methodologies for knowing yourself. I think just trying something new, whether it's like, oh, I've never really dived into astrology, like what could that tell me about myself? Or, again, the Enneagram if you have it. But I think something for me further into my journey of finding myself and that internal experience was asking the question, how do I want to feel if you've never done that? I think really shifted some understanding of myself asking that question. So again, if I haven't said it enough, I think being curious either about other people or yourself is has been maybe the most helpful for me in learning who I am and finding myself.
And I love that how do I want to feel question. I feel like for people like me who may be more on the cerebral end of things and get stuck in their heads a lot, that how do I want to feel question shakes me up every time because what I may think works may be like directly in contrast to the feeling I actually want to derive from something. So very helpful question to bring up for sure.
Yeah, I had a therapist once talk about that, like kind of after that was already part of my like a tool in my toolbox, but kind of taking the almost like the sentence structure of like how do I want to feel, fill in the blank, and then being like, and what does that look like, sound like possibly taste like or smell like what does that look like and what does that sound like taking practical steps towards that is sometimes helpful for me. So maybe as a cerebral person, like asking this really maybe feeling question but then taking it into practicality has been helpful for me also too.
Yeah. Ooh, I love a very actionable takeaway, especially toward the end. Well, Kaylee, this was a very phenomenal, I think, conversation, especially as we go into the fall season deeper in transition. I think this time can be really hard for folks struggling with just mental health and depression and night being longer. And so it can be a little intimidating to maybe try to be more curious in this time because it can be a trigger. So I would say if that's someone listening, maybe try to ask those deeper, curious questions with a licensed mental health professional if you're unsure of where it can lead and you're a little bit daunted. And for others who may be unable to ask some of those deeper questions right now by themselves, definitely, connect with a trusted friend or send me an email, because it is super important. And I know Kaylee and I have seen a lot of growth from this. So love you, Kaylee. Kaylee's one of my besties who just put a meeting on the calendar for our group of college friends to help her think about Like tomorrow, literally, we all got it out of nowhere. I was like hanging out with them. Like, did you get that email from Kaylee with the subject to like talk about her life and help her make a decision? I was like, yeah, it's Kaylee. We'll learn about what it is later. So if you need the support, reach out. People will help discuss this stuff with you, and we'll be happy to. So thanks for that invite, Kaylee. Looking forward to it.
I mean, you're helping me with my life, so I'm looking forward.
All right, let's move on.